Hello everybody and welcome to our webinar, How DocsPlus can provide inclusive classroom support for dyslexic learners. My name is Katie and I'm joined by my colleague Phil. We are both education consultants here at Quick Software and we talk with educators every day. Also joining us is our colleague Rosie, who is going to reflect on her first-hand experience of school and exams and the impact that dyslexia had on her education. If you have any additional questions during the webinar, please type them into the Q&A box and our colleague Andrew is there ready to answer any questions that you've got. So just use the Q&A box and Andrew's there waiting to reply. So first of all, Rosie, let's start by thinking, what is dyslexia?
Yeah, so dyslexia is a combination of abilities as well as difficulties, and it's a disparity between them that is often the giveaway clue. So a dyslexic learner, despite certain areas of difficulty, may be orally very able and knowledgeable, as well as being creative, artistic or sporting. Well, I do like to think so anyway. Alongside these abilities will be a cluster of difficulties, and these will be different for every person.
Yeah, and we know that learners with dyslexia will often experience difficulties relating to literacy, but they can also encounter challenges around numeracy and general organisation. For example, when we think of written work, students may have a poor standard of written work compared to their oral ability. They might have poor handwriting with badly formed letters. They might have neat handwriting with poor spelling. They can confuse upper and lowercase letters. They might spell the same word differently in the same piece of work. They might write a lot and lose the thread, or they might write very little. So Rosie, starting with your written work, can you describe some of your main challenges for us?
Yes, so I had three main issues with written work. So firstly, it was hard to retain the information on what the teachers were asking me to do.
Okay, so at this point I'm going to jump in and show you how we might address some of the issues that Rosie's experiencing with or has experienced with DocsPlus. So this first one is about retaining information, and often dyslexic students struggle because they have poor working memory. This is really difficult for them if they're given a complex range of instructions and then have to follow that task. So I've actually got a genuine question here from the topic of Christmas Carol. And one of the ways that maybe a teacher who was supporting a student that was dyslexic in DocsPlus could help that student is to use something called the voice note facility. So I'm going to click on this little microphone icon up here, and it's going to pop up a sound recorder. So what I can do as a teacher supporting Rosie, I can go in and I can actually record the task onto that voice note. So I'm going to do that now. How does Dickens present Scrooge as an outsider to society? Write about how Dickens presents Scrooge in stave 1 of the novel, and write about how Dickens presents Scrooge as an outsider to society in the novel as a whole. Okay. Now I've just recorded that as a single voice note. You can see that voice note in the margin, and actually even as you scroll up and down the text, that voice note stays there, so it's always ready for the student to access. I know from speaking to Rosie in the past, she might have found it more helpful to have those three sets, the three parts of that instruction broken down into separate voice notes, and that's absolutely something you can do. You can have 6 voice notes of up to a minute each, so there's plenty of recording time there. There is another way to use voice notes as well while we're on the subject, and that is for those students that maybe start off with some great ideas about what they're going to write, but then might lose the thread. As Katie said, they can lose the thread later on in a piece of work. They could actually use a voice note themselves as to sort of capture those ideas, so that then when they're later on in the essay, they could listen back to them.
Yeah, so spelling was tricky. So the standard advice to use a dictionary was unhelpful. I might know the sound of the word, but if I managed to actually find the correct word in the dictionary, I couldn't be sure it was correct as I couldn't confidently read the word.
Okay, so yeah, so obviously difficulty spelling is something that's experienced by a lot of dyslexic students. So I'm going to start with one example. So let's say we're writing still about Scrooge. So Scrooge was the miserly, okay, the miserly owner of a London accounting office. Okay, so I'm going to put my full stop in now, and DocsPlus is going to respond by doing a number of things.
Scrooge was the miserly owner of a London accounting office.
So we can hear straight away that the sentence is read back to us, and it's quite possible that if our spelling was very, very poor, it would be immediately obvious when DocsPlus tried to read it back. Now, in this case, I've gone for a what you might call a phonetically plausible attempt at the spelling, but it is certainly wrong. So what I'm going to do is what you'd perhaps expect me to do. I'm going to right click and I'm going to get a list of words. Now, what a lot of students will do when faced with a spell checker in a word processor, they'll just guess, and they'll often guess at the top of the list. But what we can do in DocsPlus is if we're not 100% sure, we can right click
miserably.
And actually, in this case, the top of the list is not the one we want. It's actually the second one. Again, right click to listen.
Miserly.
So rather than just guessing, this is much more useful to the student because they're actually listening with a right click, making a decision, and then putting that word in. So that's one way in which DocsPlus can help. Another way is back to the support bar up here. We've got a prediction tool. So this can help us in a number of ways. So the story is set at Christmas. So I'm going to start writing that. The story is set at Christmas, and I'm going to have a go at spelling that with a K. And as you can see, it has still managed to find Christmas for me, despite the fact that my spelling is fairly way out from where it should be. I can again listen.
Christmas.
Select and it goes in.
The story is set at Christmas.
Okay, so that's a couple of ways in which DocsPlus can help, the predictor and the voice and the predictor and the spell checking. But what DocsPlus also has access to is something called learning grids. So if we click on the folder icon and click on learning grids, what we've got is this amazing bank of resources that our curriculum team are forever expanding. So there's almost 1,000 resources there at the moment, and these go up every month. And you can see that the resources right across the curriculum. So we'll look at some science examples later, or we could be working in geography or history. But since we're talking about Christmas Carol, I'm going to go straight for English literature. I'm going to open up the Christmas Carol here. And we've got 6 resources that are going to help us with the writing of Christmas Carol. And the first one I'm going to open up is quick words. So this is great. So obviously, a limitation of a dictionary is you've got to have a rough idea what it is you're, how to spell the word that you're looking for. Whereas here, I'm presented just with a set of keywords which are going to be useful to me when I'm writing about a Christmas Carol. And if there's any words or phrases I can't read, I can again click on them. Well, right click on them.
Business partner.
And that will read them out to me. And then if I left click on them, they'll go up and help me with the writing. So that's one way to help. And that's kind of like the entry level, just a set of basic words on one tab. Now, for some students, and you might well in your classrooms have students of a variety of different levels, you might choose something different. So I'm going to open this one, which is a tabbed word bank called Christmas Carol Characters. And this is great because when we're working and writing about different characters, we've got some words and phrases appropriate to those characters on the different tabs. So if I'm writing about Tiny Tim, here's a bunch of words and phrases that I could consider using, and the same for some of the other characters in the story. Okay, the last one that I'm going to open up is this A to Z. So for some students, they will have a good, a confident grasp of a wide range of vocab, but they might still need some support spelling it. So here they can find their word in a much larger word bank, an A to Z word bank. And of course, we've still got that right click support, and then we can select the words and we can send them in.
Finally, Phil, I was slow at handwriting, which made it difficult for me to complete the work in the allocated time. Also, being slow at writing meant that lots of great ideas I wanted to include in my work has slipped away before I actually managed to commit them to paper.
Right. Okay. So there's a couple of things that we can help you with there. So let me open the predictor again. So supposing I've got a sentence in mind. So something about Ebenezer Scrooge. So I'm going to start typing, and what you'll see is those words and phrases are popping up in the predictor as I'm typing. So Ebenezer Scrooge, I'm going to select that. Okay. And we'll put him in his business partner, Jacob Marley. And look, I've only had to put in JA, and up's come Jacob Marley. Okay. And they were, okay. And what were they? They were business partners. Okay. So business, and then, oh, I only have to get as far as P, and we've got business partners, and I'll complete the sentence.
Ebenezer Scrooge and Jacob Marley were business partners.
Now, before we started on this, I knew I was going to use that sentence as an example, and I just did a quick tot up, and that's 57 characters in that sentence, okay? But using DocsPlus, I actually only need 10 keystrokes to complete that sentence. So that's a huge potential there for reducing the amount of time it takes to enter the information, okay? So that's one way in which we can help. Another way in which we can help is with some of the writing frames. So maybe we're doing a book review of Christmas Carol. Okay, so what I'm going to do is just go back into Learning Grids, and I'm going to just type in book review. And what we'll find is that we've got a really good book review frame here. So let's open this. So now, the title of the book I'm reviewing is, the author is, it is aimed at. We've got a tab for the plot, the characters, and the style. And because a single click will let me put in those whole phrases, that's massively speeding up the amount of time it's going to take for me to complete my work. And of course, this one also has the benefit of helping me with structure, something that we'll come back to a little bit later. And finally, we've got some really good research studies on our website, but one of the research studies, the Angus research study, showed that using our assistive technology allowed students to write almost 3 times as much without assistive technology, and with over double the number of multisyllabic words. So they tended to use more complex vocabulary.
As we can see, all these support tools in DocsPlus empower students to become more independent in their literacy. Many users of DocsPlus soon start opening or creating word bars, such as the ones that Phil has been showing us, for themselves to enhance their learning, whether that's in a school setting or working from home. So moving on from writing, let's consider some of the reading difficulties associated with dyslexia. Students may omit, repeat, or add extra words as they read. They may read at a reasonable rate, but have a low level of comprehension, or they might have difficulty pinpointing the main idea from the text that they are reading. Rosie, let's go back to your experience. What's your feelings and reflections on reading?
Yeah, absolutely. So, for example, let's imagine I was reading something from a book or a worksheet or from the internet. So we were all given little laptops in school. I would often struggle on words and not fully comprehend what the text means, as I couldn't read every word in the text. I would then just make a guess and continue reading. I also know that I'd have to reread parts of the text, which would take someone else, say, 2 minutes to read, but me 10 minutes, because I'm a slow reader and really want to understand what I have read.
Okay, so reading is definitely something that DocsPlus can help with. And here's a little tip. What I've just done is I went to a website and grabbed some text from A Christmas Carol that I've just pasted in to DocsPlus here. And we can use DocsPlus to help us with this. So we could start at the beginning. If I have my cursor right at the beginning,
External.
then any word that I click on will be read back to me. But let me just start it reading.
External heating cold had little influence on Scrooge.
So I can listen to that, and if I've got headphones on, without disturbing the rest of the class, I could listen to that over and over again if I needed to, because as Rosie said, sometimes she might need to reread something or review something to fully understand it. Some students will be okay with quite a lot of the words. They can read most of the words, but they might get stuck on just the odd word, in which case DocsPlus can help with your reading fluency, because if you get stuck on a word, you just click on the word you're stuck on,
Heaviest.
it will just read that one word. Or if you want to just select a section and just hear that particular phrase, then again, you just select the section and then you can press the speak text button and it will read that back to you.
Now, as we mentioned at the start, every learner can display different characteristics with dyslexia. Phil, how can these individual preferences be accommodated in DocsPlus?
Okay, so this is quite a big topic. We could spend a lot of time on that, but I'm just going to give you a quick overview. So if we go across to the options ribbon, so far we've been working on the document ribbon at the top here, which has got all our supports in it. But if we go across to the options, we can actually change the way that DocsPlus works and we can tweak it for the individual. So different students have different challenges. They all have their own individual challenges. So you can change things about the way DocsPlus behaves. So we've just been talking about reading. So something we might want to do is to go into the speech, and we might want to slow the speech down. So we've got a number of options there to slow the speech down, to speed the speech up. You can change the voices. So we have male voices and we have younger voices that work with DocsPlus, and we have older voices that work with DocsPlus. You can even make it speak after each word for those students that appreciate the reassurance of having that speech feedback as they're typing. You can make visual accommodations. So in the display settings there, we can change screen colors, we can change fonts if you want to use a particular font because a student with dyslexia is more comfortable in that way. You absolutely can do. And we talked about the predictor earlier. Well, even that is configurable as well. So for students who are less confident with the writing, I might restrict the vocabulary just to the high frequency words, but as they become more confident, I might widen that up so that there's a wider range of words that are being predicted for them.
Great, thanks, Phil. Now, before we move on to think about exam support, there can also be organisational challenges associated with dyslexia. Students may have difficulty processing information at speed. They may misunderstand complicated questions, or they may struggle to hold a list of instructions in their memory.
Yes, so I actually had problems structuring long piece of writing and trying to keep the question that was being asked. I then lose track of what I had written and the text not making sense, as I just couldn't work out a sense of structure and what information should be in which paragraph.
Okay, so there's lots of different ways in which DocsPlus can support structure. And one of them we've already mentioned, that was the book review frame, because as well as helping speed up text entry with sentence starters, it helped with structure because it had tabs for the different sections of the book review. But there's another aspect of DocsPlus that we haven't looked at yet, which is called the workspace. And these workspaces, they can be created from scratch, or you can use template ones from our Learning Grid site. And in fact, that's where I'm going to go this time. And since we've already done quite a bit on English literature, I'm going to go for a different subject area. I'm going to go for science. And a time when I guess structure is really, really important is when we think about scientific inquiry, when we're doing scientific investigation. So I'm going to use that as an example for this, but there are countless other examples across the other subjects that I could have equally happily picked. So under the scientific inquiry section, there's a number of different resources there, but what I'm going to look at are two of the investigation planning resources. So here we've got Science Investigation Planner. So I'm going to open this one first of all, and this is a fairly simple workspace. So a workspace can be used like a mind map. It can be used as a visual organizer. We can put pictures on it, we can put words on it, we can even put voice notes on it. And you can see here along the bottom of this screen, for those students that are perhaps find it more useful to speak into this and get their thoughts down in that way, then they can use the microphone and they can put little voice clips on each part, method, aim, method, hypothesis, variables, etc. You can put text here, and that's one way to sort of lay out a fairly basic investigation. I'm just going to open another one from Learning Grids, and this is a slightly more complex example. So it's in the same section, but it's called Scientific Method Preparing for Investigation. And what you can see here is we've actually split it up into problem, hypothesis, and procedure. And on each section, you can then break that down into subsections. So again, helping students to partition their thoughts and organize their work. Now that's an example or those are examples of a couple of pre-created workspaces, template workspaces for you to use. I'm going to open one now where a student has created it themselves. So we're going to open this one here on evolution. So maybe a student is planning some writing about the evidence for evolution, and what they can do is they can put, as you can see, we've got some pictures there. We can also put some text on. So fossil evidence, we've got ammonites and we've got dinosaurs, so I'm going to pop that in. And horse is interesting because horse came from a dog-sized ancestor. Okay, and we've got pretty much a complete fossil record. So I'm here playing the part of a student. I'm putting some information into here. So that's helped me to organize my thoughts, but I need to go from there to writing support. And there's a couple of different ways that I can do this. So some students have what you might call blank page syndrome, where they're faced with a task like doing a large piece of writing, and they might not know where to start. So one thing that we could do is click on this send to button on the left, and we could send to the document as text. Now, if I do that, I'm just going to send that
Evidence horse.
I'll just stop it speaking for a moment.
Coley.
We don't need it speaking at the moment, but you can see there it's taken all of the titles off there and actually put it and it's put them all across as headings that I could write under. So that's one way of using it to structure my work. Another way of doing this is actually to take all the information on there, again use the send to button and create a word bar. And if I do that, I've then got all my words and phrases which sit at the bottom of the screen and can help support me with the writing. And of course I could have split that word bar into different stages. I can have multiple tabs on it to help me structure a longer piece of work.
Yeah, and finally, getting the appropriate level of support in exams is essential. Now, before Phil moves on to talking about exam mode, Rosie, what are your thoughts as someone who has experienced access arrangements?
Yeah, so my peers would say I had it easy and you're not doing the exam like we are and you're in a separate room with a few people, so it's less stressful. So I remember the scribe was more bothered about her handwriting being neat than writing my response quickly. I'd then have to pause what I was saying, so my brain is wanting to get all the information out of my head for her to finish a sentence and catch up. That meant I lost flow and couldn't remember what I was going to say. As a usual way of working, I didn't have a scribe with me in every lesson. I remember I got to practice with the scribe once, possibly twice, before having to use a scribe in the exam. So this was not normal. It's completely different. It's completely different verbally saying an answer. Also, the school couldn't facilitate me having a scribe in every lesson because that would just cost way too much money. And then finally, with the reader, I would find I wouldn't even bother putting up my hand for them to come read for me because it would just take far too long and that would waste time. So I'd just take a logical guess at what I was reading. Also, it feels really embarrassing when you're in year 11 trying to get someone to come read for you.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you for that, Rosie. So there's a number of things that you've mentioned there. Just let me pull this down to the screen so I can see it. Here we go. So the first thing I'm going to do is just open this matrix up on providing access to exams. So DocsPlus has this lockdown exam mode, and you can look at that on our website, www.cricksoft.com. Just follow the links to DocsPlus and go to the exam section. And this exam mode addresses everything really that Rosie explained as being an issue in what she just said. So firstly, you can see down the left-hand side of some of the typical requirements that we see. If a student's got some sort of access arrangement in place, then it's likely that it will have words in it like read, scribe, reader and scribe, word processor, etc. And that shows you what you can and can't switch on and off in DocsPlus. But that's important because obviously students must be allowed to be taking their exam fairly. So we can shut down and password protect any aspect of the support that is not that the student isn't allowed to use in that particular examination. Okay, so you mentioned a couple of things. So you said, that the problem with the scribe writing and responding more slowly than you were thinking. I mean, that's not ideal, and obviously ideas are sort of evaporating in that time. And you also mentioned the sort of the lack of rehearsal. Well, firstly, the thing with the lack of rehearsal when working with a scribe, of course, once you've got DocsPlus in the school, there are no cost implications to practicing. So unlike having to have a scribe there for practice sessions, which you could imagine you could only do in a limited manner because there wouldn't be the manpower available to offer that to many, or offer it very often. Well, with a DocsPlus, you've just got you can use that every single lesson. In fact, many people, it's just their usual way of working, and they will use that particularly throughout their 2 years leading up to GCSE. But for many students, they will use DocsPlus before then. But going back to the idea, going back to talking about reading, what I'm going to do is pop into DocsPlus and just highlight one of the most popular features in the exam mode of DocsPlus, and that's the ability to have an on-screen reader. So I'm going to open this is a genuine AQA geography paper here. So I'm going to open this up in DocsPlus. So we've got the reader here, and what we can do, if we scroll down to say the first question. So if I need help reading that question, then I can simply select it, and then I can press the read text button at the top.
State what is meant by extreme weather.
Okay, now, if I'm a student with dyslexia, I might ideally hear that a few times before I've fully grasped it. Now, if I'm in the exam situation, I'm talking to a human reader, I'm happy to ask them to read it once. At a stretch, I might be happy to ask them to read it a second time. But if I need it read 3 or 4 times, I might just be too embarrassed. And I think, Rosie, that's what you're saying. It's really quite embarrassing working with a reader. But I've got no problem pressing the button at the top of the top of the page repeated times to hear that over and over again. And of course, it's much fairer as well, because different humans will read things slightly differently to slightly different students in different contexts, whereas a robotic reader, one using IT rather than an actual human, is going to be much more consistent and read it the same way every time. And one further thing that you can do here, for those students that are allowed to use DocsPlus as a word processor at the same time as a reader, we can have the question at the bottom of the screen here, and then we can tile that with our writing at the top so that we can have them there at the same time.
Another issue, Phil, was proofreading my work. As I mentioned before, I find reading difficult. Also, when you haven't got a very good grasp of spelling, proofreading is definitely less effective because it's almost impossible to notice any spelling errors.
Yeah, so that's absolutely something that DocsPlus can help with. So we can use the speech support as we showed before to read back anything that you've written. And you can see here in this piece of work, we've got tragic and relationship are misspelt. So I can right click on those, and then I can listen,
relationship,
check, and then put it through. So that allows the student to proofread their work effectively and massively improve the accuracy of the text.
Brilliant. Thank you for that, Phil and Rosie. Phil, just before we sort of finish off, do you want to show us the licensing options on the website? And I'll just talk people through this in the last few minutes.
Of course.
So for those of you that are considering using DocsPlus, I'm sure you've got the question, how much does it cost? What are the licensing situations? So Phil's just opened it up on the screen. So just a couple of things to note before we start talking about costs. Licenses are for 3 years. The costs that you see are one-off costs. We don't charge annually. It's a one-off upfront cost for a 3-year license. Licenses can be used on laptops, PCs, iPads and Chromebooks, so a mixture of platforms and devices that you can now install and use DocsPlus on. We start with the smallest license, the 1+1, allowing you to install DocsPlus on 2 devices, ideal perhaps for a student working quite closely with a TA or a support worker. moving all the way up to the school and college flexi license, which allows you to install DocsPlus on an unlimited number of site devices, and also gives you home access for all students and teachers at home, which lots of schools and educators are finding invaluable at the moment, when we still cope with students being on site and off site, and making that provision for home learning and ongoing studying. So there are license prices. Thanks everybody for joining us today. If you've got any more questions around costs, if you've got any more questions around exams, I can see that Andrew's been busy in the Q&A box. We'll keep the webinar open for a few more minutes after we finish. So if you have got any more questions, pop them in the Q&A box and we will respond. But just to finish off by saying thank you so much for joining us today. One of the team will be in touch with you very soon, or of course you are more than welcome to contact us on our details on the screen. So thanks to Phil and Rosie, thanks for the audience out there for joining us. And as I say, if you've got any more questions, we'll leave it open, the Q&A box, for the next 5 minutes. So thanks everyone, and goodbye.